has observed Kashmir Solidarity Day. Yesterday we got one of our innumerable public holidays, but this one doesn't know whether that is the best way to pay tribute to Kashmir or to remember Kashmir by simply closing down a country that's already closed down in so many other respects. We need to work and be productive and honor Kashmir with hard toil and sacrifice rather than just observing a strike. And it was a waste of a very precious day in my humble opinion, but it's very coincidental that this literature festival was held on these two dates, and Mr. Basharat Peer is gracing this event with his presence. Friends, I want to point out that the book is published by Random House India in the year 2008. I hope some of you have had the opportunity to, oh excellent, I'm sure Liberty Books here and others have got copies on sale, but the book is strongly recommended for obvious reasons. It is the excerpted comments on the back cover, which I shall read out for your benefit shortly, give you an idea, but let me tell you about him. It's an unfortunately very brief bio note that they've included. It says, Basharat Peer was born in Kashmir in 1977. He studied political science at Aligarh Muslim University and journalism at Columbia University. He has worked as a reporter at Rediff and Tehelka, two very famous journals, websites in India for investigative journalism, and has written for various publications including The Guardian, Financial Times, New Statesman, and Foreign Affairs, where he was assistant editor. He is currently based in New York. And on the back cover of a book which contains about 15 chapters and an epilogue, it's a book just under 250 pages, very well produced, very friendly to the eye, and it has these, it opens with this marvelous and relevant quote which he's picked out from James Baldwin, the black American writer, who says it so well, quote, "People are trapped in history and history is trapped in them." And that's from a book by James Baldwin called Stranger in the Village. But let me share with you 4 quotes that give you some idea of the outstanding work that he has produced. Pankaj Mishra, who you may remember wrote End to Suffering, he says, describing the ruin of Kashmir, curfewed night doesn't only shock, it challenges our most cherished beliefs in democracy, secularism, the rule of law, and the power of individual conscience. Everyone should read it. Pankaj Mishra. And then the inimitable Khushwant Singh has this to say, if you want to know why Kashmiri Muslims who opted to stay with secular India rather than join Muslim Pakistan in 1947 now hate us and want us to get out of the valley, you cannot do better than read Curfewed Night. It is beautifully written, brutally honest, and deeply hurtful. It needed courage to write it. For Indians, it is a must-read, unquote, Khushwant Singh. Then Tavleen Singh, a well-known columnist and author, has this to say, an important book. For a change, we hear the story of what happened in the past 15 years, told in a genuine Kashmiri voice, unquote. And then our very own Ahmed Rashid has this to say, the story of Kashmir has never been told before so evocatively and profoundly. Peer writes with the skill of a novelist, the insight of a journalist, and the evocative power of a poet, unquote. I think that deserves a round of applause. Wow. Bahut khoob, bahut khoob. And I just want to add my tuppenny's worth to those marvelous quotes by saying, even though I didn't want to speed read the book, the publishers, the hosts unfairly foisted this responsibility on me, which I now welcome. But as I read through the book, it was a book that is deeply felt, as has already been said, and yet avoids being gushingly emotional. And it's a delicate line to walk. At times he is almost bland in the way he describes incidents of unspeakable torture and the pain and the humiliation. And yet you find that he is able to strip the prose of adjectives that might simply add without really contributing to the resonance of meaning. And the second element I found interesting about this book is that he looks at Kashmir through the lives of a terrible word, I hate to use it, but there is no choice. Ordinary people. Ordinary people are noble people, but by ordinary I mean that it is an old friend now running a pharmacy shop, whether it is the survivor of rape, a woman who was raped on her wedding night by soldiers, whether it is people he rediscovers. These are people who are memorably portrayed in this book. And he looks at them through, and he hasn't interviewed a single political leader, nor strikingly has he presented the Indian viewpoint on Kashmir, nor has he attempted to represent the Pakistani viewpoint on Kashmir, nor in a formal sense has he said this is the representation of the Kashmiri's own viewpoint. And yet all three facets come through in the book in a very brief and pungent way. So this really sets this book quite differently apart from anything that I have seen in recent times. And it has these marvelous quotes which I want to share before I turn to him with my first question, and then after that we'll open it up to the discussion with you as much as possible. For example, he says, Kashmir is older than our memories, older than the memories that we have inherited, not just living memories, but all the memories that we have inherited, unquote. And about Srinagar's agony and ecstasy, if there is any ecstasy there now, quote, Srinagar is a medieval city dying in a modern war, unquote. And then it brings out the pain of those who have lost people. Quote, Srinagar is a city of the highest military presence, but Srinagar is also a city of absences, unquote. Traveling to Mecca is the only traveling most Kashmiris do. And finally, this very, very telling quote from an Indian Army officer who he meets with journalists. In chapter 15, he says, and this Indian Army officer has this to say finally. He confesses to him, quote, I was a different man before I joined the force and came to Kashmir. But I'll stop there and I'll put the first question that occurs to me looking at this great portrayal of Kashmir. Basharat, I just wanted to know, because there are references in your work to living in Kashmir and then leaving Kashmir, going to Aligarh, going to Delhi, and then returning again because you are drawn back to your soil and to your soul. And now in recent years, you've moved not just to Delhi or Aligarh, you have moved slightly far away to a place called New York. How does distance affect your relationship with Kashmir now at this time?
Well, one has to leave, like it's not necessarily conflict, but people from all parts of the world leave to go to college, to university, and then as a writer, I mean, you basically just want to go to a place that allows you to write, to focus on the work, because, you know, I mean, a lot of this writing was done while keeping different jobs. And then, but ultimately the distance does matter to some extent, but not as much as we think it does. Because, you know, the act of writing was basically, I wrote parts of the book in Srinagar in my house, and parts of the book I wrote in coffee shop or in Delhi or in a library in New York. I mean, it's you know, nowadays it's basically you just open that computer and you are a slave of the Microsoft Word. I mean, you forget what is around you, and all that you have is your notes from the field, and in certain parts like conversations and memories that you want to think and process. But in this particular case, the leaving helped in the sense that I left in the mid-90s to go to college to Aligarh. Well, you know, I mean, it saved my life to some degree, because that was a very intense time. That you never know, the chances of being hit by a stray bullet on a street were high. So certainly a degree of protection and being able to live in a place where you could process what was going on back home. And you know, in that sense, it was a refuge, being away from Kashmir at various points. But then it never leaves you. I mean, it's true of any place. I know a lot of Pakistanis who live in New York, or Indians, and every writer I meet there, they're basically thinking about the places they have left. And that's how a lot of writing gets done.
To me, in terms of distance, Basharat, is that tragically, after you left in the year 2010, Kashmir has witnessed yet another phase of discontent. And this time, it's been extremely violent, as we know. And I just want to say at this forum, this is not meant to be an India bashing forum. So I'm not putting the question to you because as a Pakistani, one feels very critical of Indian policies. I'm just saying that from your feedback from the people who you know, has Kashmir now entered yet another or a completely new phase of suffering?
Well, you know, I mean, one can't just do India bashing when it comes to Kashmir. You can do a bit of Pakistan bashing too. I don't think either country can claim to be the saint in this conflict. It's a curse on both their houses, as Shakespeare said. But, well, I mean, if one looks at it in a longer view, last 20 years, like 1990 onwards, like the 90s were the most violent decade, in which the most terrible things that one had to write about happened. But 2007, 2008 onwards, there's been in a way a transition in Kashmiri politics, which might be visible, but you feel it more strongly there. I mean, there were really two watersheds. 1990 in some ways was beginning of this armed militancy, the armed rebellion, and like the thousands of boys crossing into Pakistan, you know, Muzaffarabad and other places for training. And, you know, my high school, half of it was empty. Everyone was going. And that story and what happened after that, that's rather well known. I'm sorry. But also sort of, you know, 2 decades of fighting has also left a lot of people dead. But more importantly, 1990 was a time when Kashmir didn't know much about what violence really is, or what it does to you as a society, as individuals. By 2008, we knew it all too well. We had done violence, and we had seen violence done to ourselves. So as a people, as a society, there was a lot of thinking about it. What does it achieve? How far does it take you? What are the other possible ways of, you know, political participation? And I know that's a big change. No teenager is now trying to cross the border in Kashmir and become a militant, go for arms training. So that phase is over. The phase of insurgency as sort of a Kashmiri-driven insurgency is over. So you see naturally that the levels of violence in Kashmir have come down a lot. and even the Pakistani groups, they don't do much now, like Lashkar or Jaish. Late 90s onwards, for 4 or 5 years, they were very active, up till 2003, 2004. But then I think they have shifted their sights, or whatever happened, and maybe the Pakistanis actually did tell them to stop a bit. So I don't think we have that level of violence. But what happens is, it is still the political conflict remains, and the levels of militarization remain. Because of course the levels of violence might be down, but the people in Indian government, they have their reasons for not, and they have their worries that something might happen tomorrow. So you have a civilian population which is living in an environment which is extremely militarized. And any place, it's not necessarily Kashmir, but any place where you have a military in residential areas, that contact is never pleasant, unless it is in what I have seen, it's never pleasant. The contact leads to something. There's often ugly things that happen.